clearest picture yet of the curious footnote in the history of mid-20th century science fiction that also marked a pivotal turning point in the development of the flying saucer movement and other science fiction religions, including L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology. It seems pretty clear that Richard Shaver suffered from some form of paranoid schizophrenia. He really did believe that life was being controlled by unseen forces from deep underground caverns. He heard voices, some nefarious, others kind, and he believed originated in an underground world populated by the evil Darrow and the righteous Terror, all descendants of an ancient race that once lived on the surface of the earth long ago, but fled to the stars. From those voices and perhaps visions, Shaver constructed a deeply textured mythology of ancient wonders, sin, tragedy, and conflict that seemed to give some meaning to the voices in his head, as well as the triumphs and tragedies of his life. Toronto, a longtime chronicler of the Shaver mysteries and editor of the fanzine Shaverton, is particularly good at revealing Shaver's story. Thoroughly researched and documented, his account of Shaver may not solve the mystery of the man, but it goes a long way toward revealing the creative if troubled mind at the heart of the Shaver mystery. Now, of course, the underground world of Richard Shaver did not spring fully grown from his brain, no matter how fevered it might have been. Subterranean adventure has long been a staple of science fiction, and even more to the point, the belief in the existence of subterranean civilizations itself has a long history, and not just among the ancients who believed in one form or another of an underworld abode of the dead. Indeed, there are other instances in which fictional stories about the underworld have been regarded by some readers as revealing a hidden, sometimes religious truth. The Shaver mystery, it turns out, is not without precedent. John Cleves Sims, now we've talked about John Cleves Sims on this channel before, he was a Hollow Earth guy, and his Hollow Earth novel, Samsonia, in 1820, Edward Butler Lloyd's Vril, The Power of the Coming Race, in 1871, again, we've talked about Vril and The Power of the Coming Race, as well as Willis George Emerson's The Smoky God in 1908, are all examples of fictional tales of underground civilizations that have been treated as true accounts and the source for religious belief by some members of the theosophical and occult communities. Shaver stories are darker than the similar works that precede them, but Palmer claimed that the Shaver tales contain truth about the hidden world under our feet as part of a long tradition. For a brief moment, culminating in the June of 1947 issue of Amazing Stories, it looked like the Shaver mystery might become an enduring pop culture phenomenon. From the time Palmer published Shaver's first crank letter to the magazine in 1943, detailing his discovery of an ancient alphabet known as Manton, a Shaver story was found in particularly every issue. Sales of the magazine skyrocketed. The June 1947 issue was entirely devoted to Shaver and featured 4 Shaver stories. Palmer classed 3 of these tales as fictionalized versions of the truth, and the 4th as completely true. Alas, by then Palmer was faced with a revolt in the ranks of sci-fi fandom due to his endorsement of the mystery, and his tenure at the magazine was threatened. Just as critical for the legacy of the Shaver mystery was something else that happened in June of 1947. Kenneth Arnold reported seeing flying saucers over Mount Rainier, and the resulting craze swept the nation. In retrospect, it makes a great deal of sense that Shaver mystery disappeared from popular awareness in favor of flying saucers from outer space. Shaver's vision was dark and pessimistic, clearly shaped by the darker aspects of his mental illness. His focus was underground, away from the light, and towards the caverns under our feet. But after World War II, Western eyes were looking upwards, to the stars and a brighter future. Even its paranoia was disguised with flashing lights and silver-toned spaceships. For a while, Palmer suggested that the sightings of flying saucers confirmed the Shaver mystery. Perhaps, he argued, they were the flying ships from the caverns, piloted by the evil Darrow. But the call of outer space was too great. The extraterrestrial hypothesis won out, and the last half of the 20th century saw films and television programs devoted to flying saucers from the stars, rather than from subterranean realms. Another conspiracy theory rose to near mainstream acceptance while the Shaver mystery disappeared. Flying saucers were reported over Washington, D.C., with the Darrow stayed hidden in their caves. Hubbard's space-based religion appealed to other sorts of stars in ways the Shaver mystery never could. Now, Palmer was quick to transition to the new reality. His new magazine, Fate, was devoted not to science fiction, but to true tales of the strange and paranormal. In the early issues, Palmer collaborated with Kenneth Arnold in the investigation of Maury Island saucer sightings over Puget Sound. In the midst of the heyday of the flying saucer movement, Palmer published the writings of self-described contactee Orfelo Angelucci. Shaver, on the other hand, continued to look down. He became convinced that he could discern images in rocks that had been preserved from the time of an ancient lost civilization. Whether the image came from the distant past or Shaver's own mind, it is clear from his elaborate paintings that he really saw something in the stones he found on his farm. Nadis and Toronto tell good stories, both sensational and true, about how two broken men, Palmer's body twisted by a childhood accident and Shaver's mind twisted by stim rays from the caverns, found each other and created something mysterious and strange. Nadis and Toronto opened up a world mostly forgotten, a world where writers were paid by the word and magazines were printed on pulp paper, and they showed us the birth and short life of a new set of religious beliefs. The characters in the story, as in every story of religious origins I have ever read, are driven by complex motivations. In this story in particular, by madness, duplicity, and devotion. It is hard, I suspect, for biographers as well as for their readers to know how much Palmer really believed Shaver's outlandish tales, and how much was simply a con game designed to raise circulation and draw in the rubes. One is tempted to think of Palmer's stance as equivalent to the late 20th century iconic detachment, but in Nadis and Toronto's telling, there seems to be something more at work. To quote William James, a will to believe. There was madness at play in the Shaver mysteries and duplicity, but at least between the two men at the heart of the story, there was devotion and true belief as well. Sensational, but true. And I think this article here gives you a really good idea of who these two men were and what they managed to accomplish with this magazine and with these stories. These were, like I said, these were very, very popular stories that were printed in these pulps. And for Shaver, as far as he was concerned, these were all true. This stuff happened to him. He was trapped in the underground world of the Darrow and the Tarot. He spent years down there. And his escape was only an accident. You know? So let's talk a little bit about the man, Richard Shaver. Then we'll talk about some more of his story here. Okay. So Richard Shaver was born in 1907 in Berwick, Pennsylvania. And he died in 1975 in Summit, Arkansas. He was a writer and an artist, and he achieved notoriety in the years following World War II as an author of controversial stories that were printed in science fiction magazines, in which he claimed he had personal experience of a sinister ancient civilization that harbored fantastic technology in caverns under the earth. This controversy stemmed from the claim by Shaver and his editor and publisher Ray Palmer that Shaver's writings, while presented in the guise of fiction, were fundamentally true, and these stories were promoted as the Shaver mystery. During the last decades of his life, Shaver devoted himself to rock books, stones he believed had been created by the ancient advanced races and embedded with legible pictures and text. He produced paintings based on the rock images and photographed the rock books extensively, as well as writing about them. Posthumously, Shaver had gained a reputation as an artist, and his paintings and photos have been exhibited in Los Angeles, New York, and elsewhere. The Shaver claimed to have worked in a factory where, in 1932, odd things began to occur. As Bruce Lanier Wright notes, Shaver began to notice that one of the welding guns on his job site, by some freak of its coil field attunement, was allowing him to hear the thoughts of the men working around him. More frighteningly, he then received a telepathic record of a torture session conducted by malign entities in caverns deep within the earth. According to Michael Barkhoon, Shaver offered inconsistent accounts of how he first learned of the hidden cavern world, but that the assembly line story was the most common version. Shavers then quit his job and became a hobo for a little while.
Crazy.
Barkhoon writes that Shaver was hospitalized briefly for psychiatric problems in 1934, but there does not appear to have been a clear diagnosis. Barkhoon notes that afterwards, Shaver's whereabouts and actions cannot be reliably traced until the early 1940s, so nobody knows where he was for years.
Yeah, I have problems with all kinds of aspects of this story, and every time I hear it, it bugs me, and it's like it's hard to go into my skeptical issues on it when there's people out there in the audience who haven't heard the whole story yet. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and I can understand that. Like, again, it's very possible that Richard Shaver was just nuts, and he cooked this stuff up in his, mentally ill mind.
Yeah, because like the main beats are the welding gun incident, hearing the thoughts, hobo, 8 years. You said he had 3 wives, right?
Right.
Uh, there was time in an insane asylum, but there was the point where he got arrested and the holographic image of this woman let him go.
Yes, yes, that's absolutely true. He did
And
wind up in jail.
that's the big point, because even if he was just a secretly very intelligent person, how did he get out of that cell?
Well, she hypnotized the guard, and the guard opened up the cell for him and let him out.
Well, that's what he says, but let's take that out of it and say that he made the whole thing up. How did he get out without help?
Maybe he just got released on his own recognizance.
He got paid, or one of the guards was stupid. They were like, "Hey, let the drunk out of cell number 4," and he actually let
Think
homeboy
about it,
out
when
of
you get
cell number
arrested-
3.
When you get arrested, they let you go the next day when you sober up, and then you got to go back to court. You know, he probably just got released and just made that up in his head, I guess.
He was behind a Popeye's chicken. That's why no one could find him.
It'd be interesting to see that if there was actually a record, because you know, jail stuff keep records. It'd be interesting to see what the records say.
Yeah, and that's just the thing. There are no records anymore for a lot of this stuff, because why would they keep them at this point?
Yeah, the greatest record of this stuff is actually the Amazing Stories magazine. You know,
Yeah,
that's where all of this stuff was printed. Now, this all starts
Right.
with Ray Palmer and Shaver. This starts because Shaver wrote a letter to Amazing Stories magazine, a 10,000-word letter.
Right? Shit.
And he claimed he discovered an ancient language called Manton. Now, as an aside note, I did a video called I Claim the World about Stanislaw Sukowski. And Sukowski believed he discovered an ancient language called Proton. And I think that similarity there, I find striking. Manton and Proton. And these guys didn't know of each other. Sukowski was in Poland at the time. One of the most famous artists in Poland. He had an entire museum dedicated to his work. Meanwhile, Shaver is, who knows where he is at this point. You know, he's not in jail anymore. He's not a hobo anymore. But I don't know where he was at the time he writes this letter to Amazing Stories. But I digress. The proto-human language of Manton was the source of all earthly languages. In Manton, each sound had a hidden meaning, and by applying this formula to any word in any language, one could decode a secret meaning to any word, name, or phrase. Editor Ray Palmer applied the Manton formula to several words and realized Shaver was onto something. According to Palmer, in his autobiography, The Secret World, Palmer wrote back to Shaver asking how he had learned of Manton. Then this is when Shaver responds with a 10,000-word document entitled A Warning to Future Man. Shaver wrote of an extremely advanced prehistoric race who had built cavern cities inside the Earth before abandoning Earth for another planet due to damaging radiation from the sun. Those ancients also abandoned some of their own offspring here, a minority of who remained, noble and human, the Teros, while the most degenerated over time into a population of mentally impaired sadists known as the Deros, short for detrimental robots. Shaver's robots were not mechanical constructs, but were robot-like due to their strange behavior. These Deros still lived in the cave cities, according to Shaver, kidnapping surface dweller people by the thousands for meat or torture.
So these robots could have been clones?
They could have been degraded clones. I don't think that they had a word for it back in the 30s and 40s. But looking at the eyes from the future, we could say, yeah, perhaps these were clones that degraded over time. And that's why they became so degenerated. So not only did these guys live underground and kidnap people, but they used sophisticated ray machinery that the great ancient races left behind. They spied on people and projected tormenting thoughts and voices into our minds. This is reminiscent of schizophrenia's influencing machines, such as the heirloom. Darrows could be blamed for nearly all misfortune, from minor accidental injuries to illnesses to airplane crashes, catastrophic natural disasters. Women especially were singled out for brutal treatment, including sexual assault. Mike Dash notes that sadomasochism was one of the prominent themes of Shaver's writing. Though generally confined to the caves, Shaver claimed that Darrows sometimes traveled with spaceships or rockets and had dealings with equally evil extraterrestrial beings. Shaver claimed to possess first-hand knowledge of the Darrow and their caves, insisting he had been their prisoner for several years. Palmer edited and rewrote his manuscript, increasing the total word count to a novella length of 31,000 words. Palmer insisted that he did not alter the main elements of Shaver's story, but that he only added an exciting plot so the story would not read like a dull recitation. Retitled I Remember Lemuria, it was published in the March 1945 issue of Amazing Stories. The issue sold out and generated quite a response. Between 1945 and 1949, many letters arrived attesting to the truth of Shaver's claims, tens of thousands of letters according to Palmer. The correspondents claimed that they too had heard strange voices or encountered denizens of the hollow earth. One of the letters to Amazing Stories was from a woman who claimed to have gone deep into a sub-basement of a Paris, France building via a secret elevator. After months of sexual assault and other torture, the woman was freed by a benevolent terror. Another letter claiming involvement with the Darrows came from Fred Chrisman, later to gain notoriety for his role in the Murray Island incident and the JFK assassination. The Murray Island incident happened in 1947. And threats made by men in black following sightings of an unidentified flying object in the sky over Murray Island and Puget Sound. The Shaver Mystery Club societies were created in several cities. The controversy gained some notice in the mainstream press, including a mention in the 1951 issue of Life magazine. Palmer claimed that Amazing Stories magazine had a great increase of circulation because of the Shaver Mysteries. And the magazine emphasized the Shaver Mysteries for several years. Barcoon notes that by any measure, the Shaver Mystery was successful in increasing the sale of Amazing Stories. There was a disagreement as to the precise increase in circulation. Barcoon notes the reliable sources reflect an increase in monthly circulation of about 135,000 to 185,000. So they were selling almost 200,000 copies this magazine per month because of the Shaver Mystery. From 1945 to 1948, Barcoon notes that 75% of the issues of Amazing Stories featured Shaver Mystery content, sometimes to the near exclusion of any other topic. Historian Mike Dash declares that Shaver's tales are among the wildest ever spoken, even in the pages of Time science fiction magazines. He also published in Other Worlds magazine, the first issue featured the story of Fall. Many science fiction fans felt compelled to condemn the Shaver Mysteries as the Shaver hoax. These fans, already distressed by Palmer's shift away from the literary or hard science fiction in the early years to the slapdash space opera, organized letter writing to try to persuade the publishers of Amazing Stories to cease all Shaver Mystery articles. In fact, Palmer put in a number of critical and skeptical letters sent to Amazing Stories, and he and other contributors occasionally rebutted or replied to such letters in print. As Bruce Lanier notes, the young Harlan Ellison, later a famously abrasive writer, allegedly badgered Palmer into admitting the Shaver Mysteries was a publicity grabber, and when the story came out, Palmer angrily responded this was hardly the same thing as calling it a hoax. Dash writes that the critics of the Shaver Mystery were quick to point out its author was suffering from several classic symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, and that many of the letters pouring into Amazing recounted personal experiences that backed up the author's stories patently came from the sorts of people who would otherwise spend their time claiming they were being persecuted by invisible voices or their neighbor's dog. So they were getting letters from crazy people. Yeah. So the Shaver Mystery Clubs had surprising longevity. Representatives of the club discussed the Shaver Mystery on John Neville's popular radio show several times in the late 1950s. For those of you who don't know who John Neville is, John Neville was like, there would be no Coast to Coast AM without Long John Neville. He was the first guy to understand but in extant recordings, he was also skeptical about the entire subject. Even after the pulp magazine lost popularity, Palmer continued promoting the Shaver mysteries to a diminishing audience, periodical The Hidden World. Lanier describes the magazine as Shaver in the Raw, with little of Palmer's editing. Shaver and his wife produced the Shaver Mystery magazine irregularly for some years. Then you got the rock books. Between the 60s and the 70s, he's living in obscurity. Shaver was searching for physical evidence of the bygone prehistoric races. He claimed to find it in certain rocks, which he believed were the rock bowls, that had been created by great ancients and embedded with legible pictures and text. For years he wrote about the rock books, photographed them, and made paintings of the images he found in them to demonstrate their historical importance. He even ran a rock book lending library through the mail. Of what writings, drawings, and photographs he claimed were archived by the Atlanteans inside the stone using special laser-like devices. Shaver never succeeded in generating much attention for his later findings, but there have been exhibits of his art and photographs in the years since his death. Artist Brian Tucker created an exhibition about Shaver's life and work in 1989 at the California Institute of the Arts, and presented Shaver's work again a year later at the Santa Monica Museum of Art and at the Guggenheim Gallery of Chapman University in Orange County, California. In 2009, Tucker curated Mantong and Proton. Look at that, Mantong and Proton, and exhibited an exhibition at Pasadena City College, which pairs Shaver's work with that of Stanislav Sukowski. That's exactly what I was just talking about.
Yeah, you did.
Now, Shaver's art has also been exhibited in galleries in New York and in traveling exhibitions of outsider photography called Create and Be Recognized that originated in the Yerba Buena Center for Arts in San Francisco in 2004. In that exhibition, which toured the U.S., Shaver's rock book photography was grouped by work with famous other outsider artists, including Henry Darger and Adolf Wolff. After its initial effect on Amazing Stories readership, Shaver Mystery continued to influence science fiction and other general literature. Many modern books and games make reference to Deros and other aspects of Shaver's story. Shaver Mystery has also influenced believers of paranormal phenomena. This has taken various forms, from suspected connections between the Deros and UFOs to appearances of Deros in the mythology of the Church of the Subgenius. Another topic we covered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of our best episodes.
Now, Pete, do you think that this guy could have just been like an extremely intelligent individual that was spending his life fighting mental illness and how abandoned he was? He also happened to be a brilliant author, and he just happened to meet another guy who could further that a little bit because he saw something special there.
I think Ray Palmer did see something special in Richard Shaver. I think he saw to increase the circulation of his magazine because he knew that the work of Richard Shaver was so unique for its time. And Shaver was prolific. He wrote a lot. He wrote, I mean...
just a little bit that you read, it was like, all right, what's happening next? What's going on here?
Yeah.
It was very action-packed. I mean, within a paragraph, you're able to give us the male lead, the female he's trying to save, what he's doing, how he's doing it, and why he's doing it. Can't beat that. Plus, it was cool. That's way ahead of its time. I mean, a smart editor would have seen that.
Oh, pardon me, I have a super chat here from Jesse Patrick for $10. Thank you so much, Jesse Patrick. Much appreciated. Drop by to say Nut Dragon. Gonna finish Terminator. Thank you very much, Jesse Patrick. I really do appreciate that.
The game or the new movie? The game, I'd say, okay, cool.
Yes, Terminator Resistance was very cool.
Yeah, I was watching Jetty playing.
Milton Knowles asks, what the fuck is the Church of the Subgenius? The Church of the Subgenius is like a parody religion.
It's brilliant.
It is. We did a...
If you keep asking questions about it, you just don't get it, man.
Yeah,
He seriously does not know the way.
There's a guy named Bob, and they believe in Slack.
Yeah,
Bob's not real. He was a
I
model
actually
from an
I got a
ad.
link to our vid shoot here where we did the Church of the Subgenius.
That was
So,
such a
Yeah,
fun
so-
show.
yeah. So guys, when you're done with us tonight, oh man. So there's a link to the channel. Where it says, listen to Richard Shaver radio show. I actually have heard Richard Shaver's interview with Long John Neville. It's actually pretty good. Richard Shaver is pretty forthright. You know, the story you speak to is actually accurate. I think that Shaver believed in this stuff. I wholeheartedly believe this was mentally ill by all intents and purposes. So, as far as he was concerned, this stuff actually happened. He was down on the ground, down on the terror. He married a terror woman who was alive, right terror woman. He married her. She was unfortunately killed by the terror, as was the rest of her. But he escaped. He was a prisoner of the terror for a while, but he did wind up getting out of it.
But he has zero evidence, zero physical evidence, not one object.
No, not a bit of evidence. No, nothing.
So crazy. It's crazy. He would have had something, especially if he was married. He'd at least have like, he'd have something. Just anything, like a fucking necklace, a paper clip, fucking just something that was stupid from their relationship. It doesn't make sense. I just think he was really smart and really nuts. And it kind of worked out for him.
It definitely did. I mean, you know, I'm sure he was making pretty good money at the time. Now,
He's a hell of a lot better than L. Ron Hubbard.
well, L. Ron Hubbard built an empire on his craziness.
Yeah, that's because he was a dick.
And he was a dick. He ripped
But
off,
just as far as the writing goes.
he ripped off,
He was crazy.
Jack
I think he
Parsons.
knew exactly what he was doing.
Dude, you remember back in the 80s, all the Dianetics and all that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. That's why I don't think he was crazy. He just knew how to, you know,
He was a really good marketing.
con.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was
marketing.
really good with marketing and telling a good fucking story.
You should link the
Right
the
there.
Scientology and the Con Men episode together
Hmm?
as a playlist.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was just like, the more I've read in, you know, how people that have come forward and said how the organization works from the inside and stuff, you know, that I've seen that's actually been put on film. I'm just like,
Yeah.
okay, so basically you did what everybody else did. How to build a cult 101. You built the cult and then you got enough followers and now it's good job. You're on maybe in 1,000 years you get to fight whoever and stuff. Yeah, whatever. Maybe religions or whatever. Eventually this shit happens.
Yeah, Mage Grey Wolf, I am being the skeptic on this one. It's too thought out. There's no, it's too thought out. It's supposed to be real. There's no like, there's no reinforcement for the story. It's like there's all this plot points. There's not that thing that goes, oh wait, you know, like if somebody wakes up from a dream, it's like a flame through his head. You know what I mean? Or whatever. There's nothing like that where he walks away with even like a plane or a scratch on the arm. Yeah, exactly. Poltergeist story. Somebody always get burned or cut or something.
As I mentioned, Harlan Ellison called the shape of mystery. He did use elements in the shape of mystery in his own science fiction short story. Agents the Agent talk about featured story called The Elevator It reports that there are 500 buildings in the United States whose elevators go deeper than the basement. And those unfortunates who descend to the caverns emerge nearly catatonic after being treated by the evil cavern inhabitants. In 2004, a Japanese horror movie, Marabito, directed by Takashi Shimizu, also references Shaver works and the Darrow. The movie references Shaver's books directly, as well as showing Darrow's at several times during the film. Richard Shaver and the Darrows are mentioned on a plaque in the video game Shivers, next to a sculpture of a Darrow in the subterranean world room. Now, Bob Shaver and his work, as well as amazing stories, are among the esoteric and unusual ideas referred to in Philip K. Dick's novel, Confessions of a Crap Artist. In the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons, which was also heavily influenced by pulp and weird fiction in its development, there exists a race of evil subterranean dwarves called the Darrow, which were first described in the AD&D First Edition Monster Manual 2. These Darrow make raids on the surface to kidnap humans to use as slaves and food, and some among them, called savants, possess magical and psychic powers, which they can use to influence people's minds. They are said to have a main stronghold deep underground where they plot to overthrow humanity. The novel Tamper by Billy Ecktrick takes its name from the Shaver's depictions of the Darrow's ability to tamper with the minds of humans in invisible ways. In the book, a boy obsessed with the Shaver mystery begins to hear strange noises in his parents' basement, which may or may not be real. In the summer of 1947, Kenneth Arnold saw UFOs near Mount Rainier. His report caused widespread interest in the UFO phenomenon. Palmer was quick to argue the flying saucers were validation of the Shaver mystery. For several years, Shaver mentioned the Darrow's supposed spaceships. The idea that Shaver and Palmer somehow predicted or presaged the flying saucer craze was later championed by writer John Keel. In his 1983 article, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, first published in Fortean Times, declared that Palmer assigned artists to make sketches of objects described by readers, and disc-shaped flying machines appear on the covers of his magazine long before June 1947. So we can note that a considerable number of people, millions, were exposed to the flying saucer concept before the national news media was ever aware of it. Anyone who glanced at the magazines on a newsstand caught a glimpse of the saucer-emblazoned Amazing Stories cover, had the image implanted into his subconscious. However, UFO researcher Jerome Clark would argue just the contrary, writing that it must be stressed that Palmer did not depict the Darrow's rockets as disc-shaped. Nevertheless, in later years, some would insist, with more hyperbole than reason, that through Shaver's yarns, Palmer invented flying saucers. In fact, Palmer's influence beyond his relatively minuscule audience of science fiction fans and Forteans was non-existent. But there are other influences as well. Poet folklorist Jesse Glass joined the Shaver's Atlantean Library in the 1970s as a young man and briefly corresponded with him. He was intrigued by Shaver's rock books and their accompanying descriptions, but noticed that sometimes the surface of the stone seemed to be treated in some way. One piece of stone looked like the surface was actually drawing or rubbing on the paper, but had been heavily shellacked or somehow glued on. In fact, bits of white paper seemed to be showing through the shellac. Glass correspondent Shaver found him to be an intelligent and well-read correspondent, until one day, out of the blue, the letters took an abusive tone. It was then that Glass ended the correspondence. Artist Jermaine Rogers had often used his version of the Darrows in his many posters to advertise rock music concerts. Rogers had approached the subject of the Darrows with an ambiguity that some have taken as proof that he truly believes in these beings. Starting in 1994, Rogers' Darrow had appeared in dozens of his posters and art prints, and in 2004 became a designer vinyl toy line. Well, I did not know about that. So there's lots of short stories they wrote. I Remember Lemuria, Thought Records of Lemuria, The Cave City of Hell, The Quest for Braille, Invasion of the Micromen, The Masked World, Cult of the Witch Queen, The Sea People, Earth Slaves to Space, The Return of Sathanas, The Land of Kul, Joe Danon Pioneer, The Loot of Babylon, The Tale of the Red Dwarf Who Writes with His Tail. That was a pseudonym that Shaver used to write under. formula from the underworld, Zegor Mephisto's collection of Mentalia, the Witch Daughter, the Red Legion, the Merwitch of Ether 18, When the Moon Bounced, the Fall of Lemuria, We Danced for the Dom, the Sunsmiths, Beyond the Barrier, and the Dream Makers. There was also a nonfiction book called The Secret World written with Ray Palmer in 1975.
Yes, he also read The Crab People.
Crab people, crab people.
Well, you know, whether it's real or not, he started an awesome genre. Good enough for me.
I did want to take some time to talk about I Remember Lemuria specifically, and I think we've got some time to do that. So, I Remember Lemuria takes the form of a fairly unremarkable pulp space opera that starts off on Earth several millennia ago when the planet was known variously as Mu, Pan, and Lemuria. The underground cities of Mu are home to two races called the Atlans and the Titans, capable of growing to enormous proportion. They were the giants in the Earth mentioned in Genesis, along with an array of hybrid beings between these groups and alien races dubbed Variforms. The main character is Shaver's supposedly past self, Mutan Mion, an inhabitant of the underground Lemurian city Sub-Atlan, so called because it is located beneath Atlantis, or Surface Atlan. Mutan reluctantly abandons his career as a painter to study medicine, and ends up learning of a plan to evacuate the Atlans from Earth, thereby saving them from harmful effects of the Earth's sun, which would otherwise lower their lifespan by centuries. Unfortunately, the plan is opposed by some groups of Atlans, so it must be kept secret to avoid sabotage. Mutan and his love interest, Arl, a purple woman with hooves and a tail, narrowly avoid a ray gun killing spree performed by a group of evil Lemurians who want to hijack the escape so they can have the new sun to themselves. Such a view could only be the result of detrimental opines Mutan. The Mutan and his comrades escape the attacking Darrow and flee into space, arriving on the planet Quanto. Once they bring news of the Darrow to the Nortons who inhabit the planet, Quanto is also evacuated, and Mutan travels to Nor, the planet where the Nortons originated. There, the Norton princess Vanu gives him a mission to return to Earth and leave behind a message using imperishable plates of teletons, or our eternal metal, preserving Lemurian science for civilization's degenerate descendants who, having left the underground cities, will become short-lived midgets under the harmful effects of the Earth's sun. Mutan arrives back on Earth and infiltrates a Lemurian control room, which he finds to have been overrun by abandoned Darrow, described as hideous dwarves, and descended from fugitives who had broken into abandoned underground cities and used defective pleasure stimulators, resulting in deformed offspring. It turns out that nearly a century ago...
Pleasure simulators are not supposed to produce offspring.
Would they do like
Simulator.
artificial womb on the end of a fleshlight or something?
You remember that last time when the hologram or the holodeck got messed up and I got hit with all those paternity lawsuits? This is like that.
It's different.
Well, it turns out that nearly a century ago, the entire government was taken over by the abandoned Darrow, who were working for an exiled Lemurian elder named Zeet. After a climactic battle, Mutan and the Nortans managed to defeat Zeet and his abandoned Darrow using a sleeping ray. Zeet was a 300-footer, and he was not only big, but amazingly fat from his soft life in his hideout, says Mutan, upon finding the comatose supervillain. It was going to be a real job to get him to the surface alive. It would not be surprising if the soldiers found it necessary to take him apart and reassemble him later on. With the villains routed, the Atlans set off for another planet, catchingly dubbed New Mu, leaving Earth to the wild men in the culture forests. This story has been reprinted in a few books alongside the return of Sathanthus, a sequel that originally ran in November of 1947 issue of Amazing, this time co-credited to Bob McKenna. The story inserts our old pal Satan into the Shaver cosmology, as Mutan and Arl travel back to Earth to take on a Darrow named Sethanus, ruler of the planet Satana, the inhabitants of which are referred to as Satanists. Satanus is described as a hybrid of a goat-legged alien race Horned Titans, and a group of human called Angles. Apparently, Shaver and company were trying to draw connections between the angels of Judeo-Christian belief and the Germanic tribe of Angles. Sethas is identified as an arch-angle. The story also throws Norse mythology into the mix, with the heroes meeting Odin, described by Mouton as having a ruby-red Santa Claus face, and the rest, although a footnote, explains that these are not the original Aesir, but merely people named in their honor. The story also briefly goes into some detail about the Atlans' first arrival on Earth, after which they founded the city of Atlansgar and fought Cronus, the Midgard serpent, and the mad early Titans. Mouton's adventures were also recounted in Invasion of the Micromen, the Land of Ku, and what appears to have been the last Shaver mystery story to run an amazing We Dance for the Dawn.
Dude, I really want to see this movie, but I don't think it's true. I really want to see this. Like,
I was just thinking about like this, the Shaver story, the Shaver mysteries would make a great movie.
oh, come on now.
If you did what was really going in connection with what Shaver believed was going. So if the movie cut back and forth between Shaver actually having psychotic episodes and his time in the mental hospital, like he believes that he's underground. It would be full of amazing special effects. You could take a special effects
Like the movie Sucker Punch.
or Shutter Island. I don't know what Sucker Punch is.
Sucker Punch was another one of those.
Yeah. She was in a mental institute in Brooklyn.
But
Shutter
Shutter Island.
Island, 12 Monkeys.
Yeah, I think Shutter Island was better than 12 Monkeys.
Yeah, I think something like that. Really kind of touch on both aspects of the story, the dream aspect and the fantasy aspect. Because you could just do I Remember Lemuria and stick completely with fantasy style. But I think it would be more compelling to actually have, Shaver and Palmer and how they were working together to create this narrative. Shaver, I picture amazing special effects and something.
Yeah, look, almost like he said, and he's telling him about the story, and yeah, then it goes into blam, hops into that scene where there you are, you're in what he was just telling.
Milton Knowles says, I've met Satanists and they're nothing like you described. They're actually very nice people. Most of the ones I know are heavily involved in charity and helping the poor and unfortunate. Well, we're talking about Satanist in the context of Shaver's story, not, atheistic Satanism like LaVey, or theistic Satanism like actual devil worship. What we're talking about is a fictional alien race in Shaver's stories that were known as the Satanists, because he was trying to reconcile Judeo-Christian ideas with his own mental illness, at least in context of the story. Yeah, I mean, we're on an entirely different, the word is the same, but they're describing two entirely different things. So, Shaver's contribution to the magazine prompted bizarre entries in the letter column. For heaven's sake, drop the whole thing, read one anonymous letter. You were playing with dynamite. My companion and I fought our way out of the caves with a submachine gun. My friend has a hole the size of a dime in his right bicep. It was scarred inside. How, we don't know, but we both believe we know more about the Shaver mysteries than any other pair. Writer David Hatcher Childress, who we all know from Ancient Aliens, comments that this letter may have been fabricated by Palmer. In January 1947, issue of Amazing published a letter by one Margaret Rogers. Rogers claimed that while suffering from a heroin addiction in Mexico City in 1930, she was taken into a cave through a concealed entrance by her friend Dr. Klemmer, who belonged to something called the Electrotherapy Institute. Inside, Rogers was taken into the care of a race of 10-foot-tall cave dwellers named the Nephil. The Nephil were advanced people who were able to cure Rogers' drug addiction using their technology. They also had vehicles powered by thought and shrinking machines, which allowed them to pass as human and walk the surface world. Rogers claimed to have lived in the cave for 3 years, during which time she learned they were also inhabited by hostile beings called the Janza and colonies of Venusians. All planets as large as Earth and larger have life in humanoid form, she said. Jim Wentworth followed up the Rogers case in his 1947 book Beginnings and later reported she died of a stroke in 1955 after moving to the United States in the mid-30s. Amazing promotion of the Shaver Mysteries prompted backlash from science fiction fans, according to Jim Probst. A group called the Queens Science Fiction League of New York complained to Anthony Comstock's New York Society for the Suppression of Vice that Shaver stories endangered the sanity of their readers, while others attempted to have the magazine banned from the mail. Although this sounds like some sort of thing that a known delusion author claimed, it is the case that many fans consider the Shaver mystery stuff annoying bilge and orchestrated letter writing campaigns amazing, asking them to please stop printing this rubbish. In a radio call-in show with Ray Palmer, one listener brought up accusations that Shaver's claims were lifted from Edward Bulwer Lytton's 1871 novel Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. Palmer responded by suggesting that Bulwer Lytton had also visited the Darrow Caves. So, following the death of its two main proponents, the Shaver mystery found life support system of sorts in the Hollow Earth theory. Although Shaver dismissed this theory while alive, his beliefs overlapped with those of Hollow Earthers, who ended up more or less absorbing the Shaver pantheon of Darrow and Terra. Today, the Shaver mystery is generally treated as a subset of Hollow Earth beliefs. A few small press magazines covered Shaver and his views, among them Richard Toronto's Shaverton, 1979 to 1985, Mary Levesque's The Hollow Hassle from 1979 to 1983, and Dennis Crenshaw's The Hollow Earth Insider published into the 90s. Well, since Shaver revealed his theories, reports of Darrow encounters have been made by others. One case comes from John Robinson, who claimed to have met a Darrow victim named Steve Brody. On the same issue of Amazing Stories with material of the Shaver mystery, Brody reportedly related to Robinson how in 1938 he had met two cowled figures who rendered him unconscious by placing a small device behind his ear. Robinson says that Brody woke up in a cavern with some other men who told him they were prisoners of the Darrow. Brody eventually found himself walking Manhattan. No idea how he got there. He later vanished again, said Robinson. This race of Darrow, or dark dwarves, introduced into the role-playing game D&D, is clearly a tip of the hat to the fictional race. D&D offshoot Pathfinder ties the Darrow more strongly to the roots in the Shaver's writing, combined with elements of gray aliens such as alien abduction. So here's the Shaver alphabet I've got in front of me. This is how it works. The Shaver alphabet, for all these letters, have a different meaning. So we'll take my name. P stands for power. E stands for energy. T stands for the force of growth, the cause of gravity, the science of growth, and E again for energy. So it would be power, energy, the force of growth, energy. That's how the Manton alphabet works. Tina, you would be the force of growth, the self, or I. I is the same in our language as in Manton. I means self. N is child or spore or seed. And A is animal. So it would be force of growth, self, seed, animal.
Which means what?
Nothing at all. Nothing at all.
Okay.
This is
I like the
crazy
animal part.
alphabet that he cooked up.
I like animals. I like the animal part.
Yeah. So I mean, this is pretty crazy stuff here we're talking about. You know, I'm not going to deny this is absolutely crazy. I mean, but it was written by a crazy man. You know, he was mentally ill. I'm not for a second denying that he was very likely mentally ill. But at the same time,
Interestingly, mentally ill.
you know, and just because he's mentally ill doesn't mean this didn't happen to him. It may have very well
That's
happened.
true.
Like,
That's
if you
true.
if you accept the Hollow Earth theory, and I know that a lot of you guys are more believers of cavernous openings within the Earth rather than the Earth being a hollow shell.
Yes.
Could there have been an advanced race of aliens that left technology down there and split to go to another planet?
Of course.
Could their descendants be degenerate clones who, kidnap people from the surface world for food and slavery?
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Is it that crazy? I mean, we talk about the Dulce base. They were drilling down a Dulce base and they knocked down a wall and found a bunch of aliens. So,
That's right.
you know,
Village.
these subterranean ideas,
Stinky
these
ones.
Hollow Earth ideas, this all comes in together, all ties in with each other.
Stinky. Watching Bed's cracking me up.
Yeah, I'm smoking on a vape right now.
Before at the beginning of the show when he was reading out the chat, I was like, why
That
is
was like the
he
weed
so
man.
angry? He's like, I'm like, he's probably just got it.
Angry, just listening. Behaving. You know,
Behaving tonight,
well, yeah, that's what having your immune system kicked to hell fucking does too. You just sit there and shut the fuck up and behave.
Poor kitty.
Yeah,
Wow, the hour really flew. I mean, we're coming up on
Yeah,
the show
it's-
here. Real quick.
yeah, man. Well, there's a lot of meat on it.
Yeah, it's a fast out, man. Fast out.
I mean, if you think about it, like all these amazing stories and everything, like just think of it this way: that inspired like Flash Gordon and all that sort of stuff, which inspired some dude to create, the thing Star Wars and all that. Which
Yeah, everything right now
in
Guardians of the
you know,
Galaxy.
yeah, which in turn opened the floodgate for like all this other like fantasy and science fiction and everything else. Cause
Like when he was first getting into it, my first thought was heavy metal.
oh god, yeah.
Right?
God, it's still got a great soundtrack.
Still remember they were reading the charges. It was like every charge you could possibly imagine. He was like, I got an A.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, yeah, a crazy person. Well, like think about this. Most people that come up with concepts and everything that eventually become real generations later. There's people that hey, we can actually do that. We can actually do that. Yeah, most of these people were pretty bad shit insane. Like the inspiration, the music. You look at them and you go, man, these people were like, you just imagine going through life tripping balls like that. But I mean, imagine how, could you imagine how gullible most people were back in the day? You start talking about like lizard people under the earth, ancient aliens and everything else, and they're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, people that don't live, they're not from the earth. They're not from where we live. They're from, see that night sky above you? They're from out there.
Mage Grey Wolf makes a point here. So sci-fi was basically started by a crazy guy.
Yeah.
Some would argue the first science fiction was done in 1616, and it's called The Chemical Wedding, written by Christian Rosencreutz. It was a early Rosicrucian pamphlet. Others argue
Really?
that the first science fiction story is actually Frankenstein from 1818.
My fellow sojourn.
So and I believe there's even a story from ancient Greece of people going to the other worlds, to other planets. Yeah, it's called A True Story. A True Story is a novel written in the 2nd century by Lucian of Samosata, a Greek-speaking author of Syrian descent. The novel is a satire about outlandish tales, which have been included as ancient sources, particularly those which present fantastical myths. It is the earliest known work of fiction to include travel to outer space, alien life forms, and interplanetary warfare. So this comes to us from the 2nd century. So you could say the earliest science fiction was done by the ancient Greeks. Science fiction's been around a long time, folks.
And I mean, yeah, if you think about it too, like all fiction is just, yeah, it's a lot of thought experimentation, looking at what you know, and then, you know, creatively coming up with a narrative so you can spread the idea around. Hopefully other people pick it up and run with it and, you know, write their hot take.
Well, I think with that, it's time to wrap it up, everybody. So before we do that, I'm just going to plug the sponsor one more time, if you don't mind. Sponsors are Dangerous. We do have a sale going on. You can save 40% if you go to my special website, peter.com. Emergency food supply. It's good to be prepared. You can click a link down in the description. It will take you right to the site. You save 40% there.
Pete, one more thing. They're asking before what you were reading from this evening for further research because it's interesting.
Oh, okay. So
It's a little late.
I was on sacredtext.com. I was also on Wikipedia, as well as Rational Wiki, and or Los Angeles Review. So Los Angeles Review of Books.org, Rational Wiki. In fact, you can read all of I Remember Lemuria, or all of it. Yeah, it's all in there for you. Interested. Let me see if I can find it. I Remember Lemuria. I'll just drop this in the chat for those of you who might be interested in reading the story. My testing earlier this week. We'll see what happens.
Hear the Rocky theme song playing in the back of your head.
Yeah, I suspect that, like, my eyes are getting better with these drops they got me using, so.
Dude, with so many people getting the flu, upper respiratory tract infections, pneumonia, all these ailments, dude, 44 active volcanoes going off right now, plus Australia on fire, plus the east coast of Africa, west coast of Madagascar. Like, there's a lot of shit in the upper atmosphere, and it's all just kind of, we're breathing it all. All those gases and particulates and everything, like, it's affecting everybody in different ways. And I guarantee you they're going to find out it has something to do with that. It's environmental.
Well, we eat crap weed.
But it's triggering like it's triggering secondary responses like infections, all that sort of stuff. Right now, I'm on the verge of pneumonia. And
Yourself healthy again.
I'm like,
King Pro says, yes, get well, Peter. Great source of enjoyment. Thank you, King Pro. I think I'm getting better. Like I said, I have what's called a detached choroid. It means that my eyes are not draining properly. There's a drainage system within the eye that flushes out fluids. What happened is my eyes were swollen, cutting off this drainage system. So pockets of fluid started building up in front of my pupils, which was really affecting my ability to see. I was concerned I was losing my sight, but they assured me that this is not a kind of go blind kind of thing. So they gave me some steroid drops that I use every 2 hours, and those are clearing up the problems I'm having with my eyes. I'm no longer seeing flashy floaters, so that's good.
nice.
Yeah, that subsided, so I'm glad that happened. Also, I was experiencing the day after I went to the emergency eye hospital. The day after that, I was experiencing some pain, but that subsided as well. My eye pressure was up the last time they checked it, from 14 to 20, which was still within normal range, so they weren't concerned with that. But I think things are getting better. I think I'm starting to see better again. They don't know what's causing it. That's the concern. So we did a chest X-ray to rule out tuberculosis, and we did some blood work today to rule out any infections. They didn't see any infection inside my eye, so that's good. We'll see whatever it is, As long as
seems like they could give you something to stimulate drainage.
Well, it's the fact is the steroid reduces the swelling, and the swelling opens up the drainage. So yeah, so I'm on 2 different eye drops. One that dilates the pupil. But enough about me and my health issues. That's it's neither here nor there. Thank you everybody for being here. I really do appreciate it. Last 3 days as we delve into the world of the weird. It really means a lot to me. And you know what? It wouldn't be what it is. I also want to thank you to Justin Patrick for your generous super chat. Much appreciated. Never expected, but always appreciated. Thank you very much. I say thank you to my panel for being here tonight. Thanks, guys. I know you're not feeling too well, Jesse. Thank you for being here. Ben, I know you have a crazy big ass night.
Did you even tell everybody about that shit?
Yeah, it's a long story, but yeah, I had some dude swinging a fucking machete and a Rambo knife off the upper balcony of me yesterday.
That was crazy. Oh,
Had tactical response and everything all over the house. Fucking crazy. Anyway.
California, man.
Yeah, man, that's what it's like here. If it ain't poop, it's machetes and Rambo knives and crazy motherfuckers off their meds.
Or on someone else's.
Yeah, right. No.
I'm on everybody's. I found an envelope.
Yeah, I'm in the heart of clown. It's crazy here. I'm like, yeah, y'all motherfuckers are gonna turn me into the Joker for real, being here for too much longer.
Scan detected.
I'm just gonna turn around and look at somebody one day and be like, everybody's gonna have a bad day.
but anyway, all's well now.
Of course, yeah, we're much better. Anyway.
For now.
Not PewDiePie. PewDiePie is not in the chat.
Thanks, guys. So let me do this right. This has been the Creepy Little Book Club, and you've been listening to High Strangeness, the #1 late night paranormal podcast on YouTube. I've been your host, Pete. With me tonight, Tina Tomaszewski, Jesse Miller at the Crow's Nest, and Fedorable the Horrible. So tomorrow night, everybody, stay freaked out.
Charging. 4, 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Oncoming traffic, Commander.
Scan detected.